The Palm Beach Civic Association brings you Studio 33480, delving into key issues impacting all who live or work in the zip code for the unique island of Palm Beach. This program is sponsored by the Fortin Foundation of Florida. And now, our host.
I'm Tim Malloy. The Honorable Elizabeth Bagley has served as a diplomat in 4 different Democratic administrations. She was the United States Ambassador to Portugal, and most recently, the ambassador to Brazil. She's just returned from that 2-year posting. She's a part-time Palm Beacher, a valued member of the Civic Association. When you went to Brazil, what was your mandate? What's the mandate of any ambassador to a new country, but especially when you went down to Brazil?
Well, when I went to first opened in Brazil, when I arrived in Brazil, it was 2:00 in the morning. You know, flights are crazy, and I came in from Panama, of all places, and there were 50, 60 press media.
Really? Wow.
At 2 in the morning. So I was prepared for that because my staff had told me that. So I had a statement. I was told, first of all, by my staff, this is kind of interesting, because Lula had just won the election, and he tended to be certainly is more leftist. He defeated Bolsonaro,
right,
who had adopted the colors of the Brazilian flag, which were kind of green, like a little like your tie, and yellow. So he always wore green and yellow. He basically co-opted, these colors. Lula's people all wore red. And, it wasn't a communist thing, but it was something that it was a color that they decided. And, the right would say it's communism. But so I was told before I even arrived, all right, here's your speech. So I, edited that out and spoke. But don't wear red or yellow or green. 3 colors that I like.
Well, there's some inside baseball. That's really interesting.
So I wore pink. So I changed clothes on the plane, and I had a pink jacket on.
Talk about Portugal. Well, vis-a-vis Brazil. Now, the European country, South American country, totally different tasks, problems, mandates. Contrast them for me.
Portugal has about 10 million people.
Mm-hmm.
Brazil has 210 million people.
Maybe more.
Huge. Portugal, is a small country that looks to the West, looks to the United States, loves the United States, just by and large. They all do. I had 2 prime ministers. One was was very close to H.W. Bush. Mm-hmm. My first meeting with him, I brought my invitation. I was very happy. I talked to my friends in the White House and the Security Council, and I said, I have to come with something because, this guy doesn't really want me there. He doesn't like Clinton, doesn't know Clinton, loved George H.W. Bush. And I said, I have to do something. So they said, okay, so let's do a reception for him for the Portuguese people, because we had an election. It was 1994. The election was in November. It was a midterm. The Portuguese tend to be Democrats, and they're in Democratic states, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, California. So we wanted to make a big deal about it. But I was the first woman, the first political appointee. And I came in saying, I'm bringing you an invitation. And he said, no, I don't want to do it. Mr. Prime Minister, you don't want to come to the White House and meet President Clinton? We want to continue our relationship. And he said, no, I'll do it. I got a lot of things to do. I'll do it maybe next year. And I said, and my staff went with me because they were very nervous about what I would say.
Right.
Don't talk politics, they say. Why not talk politics when he's a politician?
Right.
His whole cabinet were politicians. It's the same as most countries. So I said, well, Mr. Prime Minister, that's not going to work because we have a midterm election coming up in November. We're inviting you for October because we want to have a big reception in your honor. We want to honor you and the Portuguese people. And obviously it'll help during the election. It'll be a tribute to you and to the Portuguese people. And he said, just thought for like 5 seconds and said, "Oh, okay, I get it. Then I'll come."
Party for me.
Yeah. And I thought my staff, I had two, a political officer and my DCM deputy chief of mission, and they're both career. I thought they were just so white when I started telling them why we wanted to have them at this time. So, but that was kind of
That's
the
a pretty
difference.
good stroke of diplomacy for you coming out of the blocks.
I know. So, and I used to sit with the foreign minister of, who's still a good friend of mine, Jean Gama, in the second administration. So they lost the election, and I had somebody else who I actually knew really well, who is Antonio Guterres, who's now the Secretary General of the UN. But I used to sit with his foreign minister, and the two of us, and he wanted to talk about politics, American politics, and that's what we did. But I did have to ask him for something really important. It was an operation safety, and it was something that we needed to do that he didn't really want to do. It involved Turkey, and he wasn't really crazy about Turkey. But we had this, we still do, in the Azores. We have a base, military base, called Lajes Air Force Base. And we needed to bring supplies in. And it was a tough, it wasn't a tough sell. He just said, "This is really tough. It's tough for me and for us." And I said, "Yeah, I know, but the president is asking for this." And he said, "Okay."
So it wasn't exactly easy sledding in Portugal.
No, but NATO was a big part of it.
Yeah.
They were founding members of NATO. They were very proud of it. And they had a NATO base as well.
Right.
It's an Air Force base, a naval base. So a lot of that was military. But it was a small country. It was much easier to work with. Brazil was very challenging, fascinating.
And let's go to Tip O'Neill and talk about bipartisanship and the fact that that's basically your career has been built on. How important is it?
Reagan had a great relationship.
Yeah.
They didn't agree on everything, but they had a good relationship. Well, it started when I was, and I'd worked for Ted Kennedy in Boston, came to Washington to work at the State Department and worked on the Panama Canal treaties. I was a congressional liaison, 25 years old. It was quite an amazing time. So I went over for what I thought was going to be a temporary assignment for 6 months. Turned out to be 2 years. Because it was in 1977 that the treaties were signed at the OAS, Organization of American States, by then General Omar Torrijos, who was the president of Panama, and Jimmy Carter. That was his first foreign policy initiative. And the treaties had been worked on through all these other administrations. Throughout all Latin America, they were really upset that we, the United States, owned basically a slice in the middle of a country that was so valuable. We were viewed as imperialists, and starting in certainly 1964, there was a breakdown of the canal because there were so many demonstrations. And Lyndon Johnson tried to do something. They ended up cutting relationships with Panama for a while. They came back, realizing how important the canal was to everyone. Nixon sent Henry Kissinger down. There were Jerry Ford was involved. It was Ford doing. They were all very much trying to find a solution to give the canal back. And Carter wisely was told, well, he was told by the Congress, you don't do this as an executive order. We need to have it signed, sealed, delivered by the U.S. Congress. It was controversial. Right. So I went down and with Howard Baker and his team, and
Republican Howard Baker.
Republican minority leader, Senate minority leader. He came back and said, "We've got to do this. This is too disruptive. The canal itself is vulnerable, and our reputation is at stake because we are not imperialists, and we cannot own a slice of land in the middle of a country."
Right.
And we had 6 months of nonstop debate in the United States Senate. I was one of four. They called us the Gang of Four. We were in Mondale's office off the floor of the Senate, and I was responsible for getting all the amendments and the reservations that were coming in from, Democrats and Republicans. We finally got the treaty passed, and thanks to Howard Baker. We could not have done it if it wasn't bipartisan, and if he wasn't totally involved in getting it done. So that's the first part of it. And one phrase that we always use, we took from Arthur Vandenberg: partisan politics has to stop at the water's edge.
Let me ask you this, and this is the pedestrian question of the day, because, I watched the TV shows and the movies and then watched The Diplomat. And the sense one would get is it's always drama, slightly dangerous, always kind of
well, I love The Diplomat.
dramatic.
I love The Diplomat. It's fun, but
It wasn't
it's
true.
so farcical. Here you have the President of the United States asking this. I think she is a CIA or something, right? Brings her in and says, I want you to go to the Court of St. James, and here's the plane, here's Air Force One, and you and your husband, get on the plane. Well, first of all, you'd never do that. Yeah. Secondly, you have to go through a major security process. Right. It takes months and months and months. Not only all your financial, reports, but you have to get, vetted, and it takes for FBI vetting. I don't know if they do that now, but we had very strict FBI vetting. And then you had to go in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and then to the floor, and then get voted out. If they voted you out, that committee, then you can go to the floor. And then you have a vote, or they put a hold on you, the senators. So you have to have, majority on the Senate.
Well, once you hit the ground, though, it is a job that, I'm not going to say tense, but you have security and you have concerns.
A lot of
Paint me a picture of what it was like in Brazil more than possibly Portugal.
I had a lot more security. And
to the extent where you can actually describe it, what was it like?
I had 8 security guards, so I travel with my car, which was always armored.
Armored car.
And there was a car, an advance car, and a follow car. And when I would go to Rio, and we have 5 consulates, not only the embassy, but 5 consulates.
5 consulates you had to bounce to. Wow.
Yeah, it's a huge country. It's bigger than the continental United States. So the consulates are really important. So I spent a lot of time doing that. But especially Rio and Sao Paulo, which tend to be dangerous places for certain reasons, a number of reasons. But I would have the police, the local police in Sao Paulo and
in addition to your own
people. In addition,
people.
so there'd be another car.
Did the Marines guard the mission?
The Marines guard the mission, all the missions, all our. They guard the embassy.
Yeah,
which is in Brazil. Yeah. When you say mission Brazil, because it's not just one. It's a huge mission. It's 2,000 people. Yeah. It's one of the top 6 or 7 in the world. They have gradations, and this is a +5, which is the highest. It's like Beijing and London, Beirut, Baghdad. It was Afghanistan. I don't.
Nobody's in Kabul now.
Nobody's going to Kabul now. But Mexico City, which is our largest embassy in the world. So it was. I always felt protected. I had a bodyguard that would be with me all the time. 2 bodyguards would be with me when I'd get out of the car. And but they were
going
great.
Out to dinner.
They were like a family. At the end, they came over. They all came to the airport, and we had pictures. And my kids loved them. They're wonderful guys, and they were
and
mostly
what are they,
from the
Secret
military.
Service? They're military.
Yeah, these are the Brazilian. Yeah. They're all Brazilian.
We've talked about soft power and hard power. Yeah. Describe the 2 of those for me.
And then there's something called smart power.
Smart power.
Joe Nye, who is a professor still at Harvard, coined that phrase because he said you need soft power, which is cultural exchanges and visas and working together on a number of things that are important to both countries. Hard powers are obviously the military defense. So what Hillary and Bob Gates always talked about at the time, he was the Secretary of Defense who had been appointed by Bush and then stayed on through Obama. But he and Hillary were, and she was Secretary of State under Obama. And I worked for her as well. But they both talked about smart power. It's they called it like a 3-legged stool: defense, diplomacy, and development. And Bob Gates, I have his exact quote. He spoke before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the Armed Services Committee, and they wanted to, Armed Services especially, wanted to take money from the State Department budget, give more money to defense. And he said, quote, "Development is a lot cheaper than sending soldiers." So he was really pushing for what we call smart power. You need both.
Right.
And the reason that USAID is so important is that, if you go back in history to why it was founded, you talk about the diplomat, there was a book called The Ugly American, and there's also a movie on it. It was about Southeast Asia. It was about an ambassador who spent his time, he and his wife, going to parties and whatever, not getting into the local culture, not understanding what was happening within the government that he was supposed to be working with. And the whole idea was that Ugly American did not understand, the politics, the culture, the mindset of this Southeast Asian country, presumably Vietnam. Then Senator Kennedy sent this book around to all his colleagues, Democrat and Republican, 1958. When he came in 1960, one in 60, came in 61, one of the first things he did was not only establish the Peace Corps, but establish the U.S. Agency for International Development. Because at the time, of course, the Cold War, the Soviet Union was moving into Latin America and Africa and all these emerging maybe states certainly, and maybe democracies, hopefully democracies. We were trying to get them to be democracies. Soviet Union was trying to get them to be communists, and they were doing very well. And it was what President Kennedy said is, this is not charity. This is in line with our U.S. national interest. This is national security. Right. And it really is. And it's the same thing now. You have China ready to, they're already in. They're already in Africa. They're doing infrastructure. In Brazil, they have Confucius centers all over, teaching Chinese, teaching their customs. The Brazilians, by nature, love the United States. They don't really understand the Chinese, and there's reasons why. They have a whole different mindset, but the Chinese are everywhere.
How did they do this? How did China do this? Through soft power?
Soft power.
Yeah.
And hard power.
Throwing money
too.
Around?
They threw lots of money around. They just opened an auto plant. They'll have another one. They're doing critical minerals. They're buying niobium and graphite and critical minerals from Brazil. They are everywhere. We have to say, you can do whatever you want. Obviously, you're a sovereign country, but they're not a democracy. They're not. They don't share the same values. Do what you want to do, but understand who you're dealing with.
Thank you for this. This is Ambassador Elizabeth Bagley. And thank you for all you've done, because you have served the country, and I bet you still
25
will.
25 years. I don't know.
I bet you still will. Okay.
Well, I hope so.
Thank
you.
Okay. I'm Tim Malloy for Studio 33480. We'll talk soon.
Studio 33480 is brought to you by the Palm Beach Civic Association and our sponsor, the Fortin Foundation of Florida. We welcome your thoughts on how our program can best serve our members and residents.